This is an open letter to friends and folks. Here's the thing. I'm not necessarily against the empire or imperial ideas. Empires are very good actually. Empires function very well. They provide security over a big area in which trade can be done more or less easily. So, and trade, just helps everybody. Trade helps everybody eat. So empires, security, open trade, everybody eat. Those are the good aspects of an empire. And so nobody can be against that. If you are, for living by yourself on Mars, then good for you. But, most human beings, want to be in the crowd, have variety, and therefore variety can be only provided under an empire, an umbrella of security for all, so everybody can benefit and trade without worry. So here's the thing. So the empires are very good when they can be produced. But here's the thing. And empires should last a long time. That's the whole secret of an empire. In order to be an empire, you should be able to last for a long time. The way an empire lasts for a long time and provides security and everybody benefits, the way to make an empire, last long is to run the empire based on principles. Certain, principles that everybody agrees on. You come up with, like, United Nations and whatever United Nations has come up with. Based on that, you say, okay, based on these principles, we move forward. And if you do that, if everybody follows those principles, then empire can last a long time. Because, even the emperor follows those principles. If the emperor himself does not follow the rules that everybody has agreed on, for example, in the United Nations, then the empire can last for a long time. If the decisions of the emperor is based on principles, not interest. You see, it's been since World War II. No, I can't. Yeah, since World War II. World War II was the only time Uncle Sam's managers went into war based on principles. After World War II, whatever wars Uncle Sam's managers got in, they were based on interest. The first wars were, what they told us is based on collective interest, that is in our interest, it's in our interest, all of us, in our interest that, defend capitalism against communism. Now, I'm not sure if, that homeless guy or, 5, 6 million, 10 million homeless people in the West, are they also, happy that, things went the way of capitalism? Because their numbers have actually increased since the fall of those who followed the communist program. So here is the thing. So first it was the collective interest, it's in everybody's interest, so we go over there and fight communism all over Asia and South America. After that, it's become even more specific. It's sort of like it's in the interest of some oil companies that we go over there. And it's in the interest of some uranium companies that we go over there. There is no longer no speak of principles. It's sort of like we are taking this stand because it's the principle thing. No, with no shame to the game, of nobody's talking about principles anymore, because when you talk about principles, you have to apply to friend and foe equally. Therefore, you can't talk of principles. They used to say, democracy had become a principle. Democracy is not. Killing people is not killing people is a principle. Democracy is not a principle. We're going to go over there, bring them democracy. Democracy is not one of the principles. The principle is food, food, education, housing, health. Those are principles. Nobody got healthier in Iraq because of democracy. Nobody got healthier, nobody got more shelter, nobody got, Uncle Sam's manages with 10, 20 million homeless people, bomb a country on the other side, a group of people on the other side of the planet, and make them homeless. So homeless that now they have to immigrate north to Europe and North America because they have become homeless. Because what? It was in our interest? Whose interest? Can I know the name of these people whose interest was served by making a bunch of people homeless over there while you already have a bunch of homeless people here? So that money gets spent to make some new homeless refugees. Why not that money be spent in, housing your own homeless and city refugees? It just, because this is principle, spending on your own homeless people, that's a principle, the principle of, social contract. That's a principle. Here is the thing, Uncle Sam's managers, you don't have to force people into an empire. You go by principles and everybody automatically will want to join the empire. They want to join the empire, believe it or not. If you show even-handedly and, show even-handedly and didn't practice secularism but promote religiosity on the other side of the fucking planet, sort of like, this religious state of whatever, sort of like, wait a second, all the secular states who have been practicing secularism located in London, Paris, and New York, these folks who have been practicing secularism are pushing for a religious state in the Middle East, the Jewish state of Israel. It doesn't make sense. You're practicing secularism, you're pushing religiosity. You're saying that, yes, they have a right over there to be the religious state of Israel, and it really doesn't matter what religion that is. It could be a Shinto state of Israel, it could be a Hindu state of Israel, it could be a shaman state of Israel. It doesn't matter. Just because you say that piece of land should belong to one specific religion, people who follow one specific religion, although a lot of people have history on that land, and they're just recognizing that the country can be a religious country. That's not principles, because principles is what you're practicing. Principle means secularism is better than becoming religious. Practice of the past couple of 100 years of especially the founding fathers of Uncle Sam business, they put their principles before their interests. Their interest was work some deal out with the fucking British and continue as a colony and just get paid a little more by the British king. But principle was that, no, thank you very much. It seems we have enough distance between us that we shouldn't be considered one country. We want this piece for us, and the other side of the pound you keep yours and we keep ours here. again, the idea that based on some, history of people together, they form a independent group. And that was the idea. They want to be independent somewhat. But the point is this. This is what the founding fathers did. And the way they expanded their empire in over United States, they had some principles, not for the Redskins, but at least some principles. They started saying that, okay, here is, we become a secular state, no sanction, no, state-sanctioned religion. We don't recognize any, but we recognize all. We recognize none and we recognize all at the same, in the same breath. But the point is this: this is what has worked. Kept the Western society, pretty upbeat. How is it that you go on, say, no, in a corner of Asia, in West Asia, there should be a religious country. And we promote that. There should be the religious state of Israel. This is what you get out of principles, and you go towards interest. And many senators and presidential candidates have stated that it's in our interest. It's in our interest, not principles. It's in our interest to support State of Israel. It's in our interest to support Ukraine. It's in our interest to, drive a wedge everywhere we can. Because that's what it comes down to. Wedges, wedges makes a lot of money because you can sell arms to both sides and hope for a war between both sides, so they both need more arms. Driving wedges is profitable, but it's not principled. As long as you run the empire based on principles and not based on we're going to drive a wedge because it's profitable. We're going to take over a piece of land over there on the other side of the planet because it's in our interest. And then they try to sell it as a principle. Freedom principle? No, I'm sorry. You define freedom, in one way. They define freedom in another way, and there is a chance that one day their values will become your values with regards to freedom and democracy. There is a chance one day their values will become your values, but not through use of force, and not tomorrow. They evolve over time. They do, but your force of sanctions, embargoes, and wars is not going to force them to advance. You can't force, evolution. Evolution takes place over time. End of story. So, matter of them, we're going to improve their form of government. Their form of government is not democracy, so we're going to upgrade them. Upgrade the dildo up their ass. Here's the thing, folks. I'm not against empires. Empires are fine. Empires are good. But empires that are self-assured, are not so insecure about themselves, about their wealth. Empires that are not given to businessmen to run. Empires that are run by intellectuals, people who know shit, who can connect different information that they have. They can connect those information quite well because they have a lot of information in their brains. Therefore, they can connect a lot of dots, so they can see. They don't see interest, they see principles, and they understand the value of running an empire based on principles, not interest. And unfortunately, lately, whatever you see is basically principles. It's basically interest. It's totally void of principles. Totally void of principles. It's sort of like, and they keep sending. The funny thing is, I've noticed they keep sending these younger and younger spokesmen out to speak to the press, or provide some kind of clarification with regards to these policies that are based on interest and not principles. So this side is killing 1400, kill 1400. That side is is already killed 10,000. So this is not a principle that is being followed. This is interest being followed. Principle says, hey, you passed the 1400 mark a long time ago. You're at 14,000 now. Could you hold back a little? This should have been said when they reached 1400. Sort of like, hey. 1400. Could we stop now and talk? You stupid motherfuckers. But the point is this. That wasn't followed. That principle, an eye for an eye, even that's stupid. But still, the principle, an eye for an eye, was nowhere to be seen. And they keep sending these spokespersons that are younger and younger. This child that's this child. She looks childish, and I try not to listen to her, because she sounds childish as well. They keep, and there's another a young boy that is just the new spokesman I just saw. It was a brown young boy with a round face, and you feel this guy just graduated 9th grade, and he's the new spokesman of whatever, Pentagon. White House. I really didn't pay attention to that either, because just the idea that the only person that was, the only person that actually was foolish enough to accept the job of trying to sell interest as principle, when like 1,500 died over there and 14,000 have died over here. But yeah, not enough. Just the number not being equal means it's not principle. At least even on the draconian Moses law of an eye for an eye, even that kind of it's out of scale with that kind of law. So it's not principles. Nowhere in it there is principles. With regards to Ukraine, most of them come out right out and said that Ukraine is in our interest. Nobody's talking about principles. Is it because they can't even themselves? None of them. Spokesmen try to do gymnastics and try to sell interest as principle, but the politicians can't do that kind of gymnastics either. So they just basically say, no, it's in our interest. Deal with it. Okay, we deal with it. All right, no problem. But the problem, you deal with it. Hey, you got a big penis. You deal with it. Here's the thing, folks. You can't. The longevity of the empire falls into danger when you start pushing interest over principles. When you start pushing interest over principles, that's when you go to, on the other side of the planet, they're having a peaceful revolution for themselves. Whatever the fuck they're doing, they're monkeys. They're doing something over there. But the fact that a superpower from this side of the planet goes over there and say, what the fuck are you people doing? I'm taking this side. $5 on the guys in blue against the guys in red. Against the guys in red. That's basically what Vietnam was. $5 on the blue guys against the red guys. Let's go. this is following interest, literally gambling, literally, you know, you know, getting rich off of the, you know, tax money going into, you know, trying to come out with some kind of outcome that would benefit us one way or another. Now, who's this us? I'm not sure, because you know the homeless people have increased, their numbers has increased, not decreased. So all this following our interest is interest has created more homeless, not less. I'm not sure what kind of interest is being followed when after, you know, 50, 100 years, the conditions at home have become worse, not better, for a lot of individuals. For a very few individuals, it has become very well. Thank you very much. But for a lot of individuals, you know, they have to work more to live on less. That's not going forward. You know, the land of plenty was, and now work more for less. So what has happened? Whose interest was being followed all these years? That is, you know, more important than principles. Folks, an empire makes money, and the heart of the empire is always going to be richer than the periphery of the empire. But if the kind of leaders that are chosen that go after interest, and you know, go after interest and move away from principles, and to the point that the politicians have to actually come out and say, you know, the war in Ukraine is our interest because none of us are dying. There's a bunch of those crazy motherfuckers are dying, and a lot of the shit that we have to go and rust in the Arizona desert, we send over there, they rust over there. And we keep producing, and this actually helps our economy. The Ukrainians are dying and the Russians are dying, but hey, look at, you know, our weapons manufacturers. They're working triple shift. But again, that falls under interest, not principles. The principle is less people dying unnecessarily, including me. The principle is less people dying unnecessarily. Thank you very much with the Marshall Plan and saving Europe. But right after the Marshall Plan, suddenly people with interest pulled their chair forward, and principles were, you know, left at the door, and Uncle Sam's managers went to bed with interest. You know, the principal was left at the door, and Uncle Sam's managers went to bed with interest. Right after Marshall Plan, right after saving Europe, now let's go see if we can fuck Asia up the ass, and fuck Latin America, and you know, fuck Africa, and you know, right after Marshall Plan, right after saving Europe, Uncle Sam's managers started going after interest. Vietnam was the continuation of the French colonialism in that area, which they used to call Indochina. It's more obvious than that. The French were trying to exploit that land, so they were fighting the natives. And after World War II, Uncle Sam's managers took the reign from the French and said, yeah, we should be making some money. We should have some interest here in Vietnam. So it's in our interest to fight the natives in Vietnam. That wasn't principled. They tried to sell it as, they gotta have capitalism. It just goes without saying, our system is better. Our system is so good that we have to, you know, take it to them. Okay? Thank you very much. They're still washing Agent Orange out of their DNA. still washing agent origin from their DNA. Here's the thing, folks. We love empires. Empires are great creatures, creatures of comfort and plenty for everyone. But you can't give the empires to businessmen to run. And here's the thing, businessmen always want to reach the top. That's, business competition. Those who love competition want to reach the top. But the leaders of the empire cannot be chosen from the business ranks. Period. The people, the committee who runs the empire cannot be businessmen. The businessmen try to reach there, but you should somehow recognize them and prevent them. Businessmen make short time decision. Businessmen want to make shortcuts, and businessmen work for interest. Interest is on their mind. Businessmen have interest on their mind. When you step away from your principles as an empire, that's when the empire becomes shaky. Because everybody figures out that, oh, this is not run based on principles. This is a bully running things based on his interest. So, am I going to stand up to the bully, or am I going to become the part of the bully's gang? Am I going to stand up to the bully? Because with regards to a bully, you have two choices. You stand up to him and he leaves you alone, or you join the gang. That's the only choice you have with a bully. You can't, be left alone. So the problem is bullies, they look after self-interest only. They have no principles. Bullies have no principles, only self-interest. So you don't want to be the bully. How not to be the bully? Don't give the reins to businessmen. Give the reins to the intellectuals. Preferably a group of intellectuals. The founding fathers. That was they should have kept the founding fathers. It's sort of like, no, we don't need any branches. We will be the, I'm sure you should have agreed, you could agree that if the founding fathers had this idea that, okay, there is 13 of us or 15 of us, we will become the brain of this structure, and we will remain executive branch, judicial branch, legislature branch. They work underneath us. We are the top dog, the 13 founding fathers. And at any given time, each one of us has the duty to select his replacement, has a selected replacement in place for himself. And since we know that the founding fathers were intellectuals, none of them, very few of them, were very successful businessmen. Therefore, because they saw long term, they were thinking long term. This whole idea of secularism and not recognizing any religion, any branches of Christianity as the religion of the land, but by not doing that, they showed how far-sighted they are. So based on that and other indications, if each one of them had given, had the right to choose their next in line, imagine that, 275 years later, you would have 13 people at the top. I think founding fathers were 13, maybe I'm wrong. But there is a number, I think is 13, but there is a number that were the ones who signed the Declaration of Independence. So, or whatever. And the point is this: if imagine there is a 13-member body at the top of all these branches of government, and those members of that body are all intelligent, well-informed intellectuals, then you can be sure that these guys work based on principles, would work based on principles, not interest. Imagine that this guy is the replacement of Benjamin Franklin, for example. I'm sure Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers, but so he was a scientist. So imagine 250 years later, his great whatever grandson is sitting or granddaughter sitting in his chair, and that has been handpicked from the original stock, handpicked. And they actually need not have picked their own offsprings. If they found a student of theirs that was much more worthy than their offspring, they would have, given the seat as replacement, would give them to them. But the point is this: people who are handpicked one by one from Benjamin Franklin, the guy you know his name right now, sitting in that 13-member chamber, making decisions based on principles. Why? Because every generation after Benjamin Franklin, they had picked somebody like themselves. What? An intellectual. They have picked an intellectual in their place. Every generation has picked an intellectual to fill his own seat because he himself was an intellectual. An intellectual is not going to choose a fucking businessman to fill his seat. An intellectual is going to choose another intellectual within his, university. The result would be you have a group of people at the top who make decisions based on only principles, because they're not businessmen. They weren't chosen by businessmen. And the one who chose them was not a businessman. And the one who chose him was not a businessman. They were all intellectuals. Right down to the founding fathers. You see, this is the only way this thing is going to work, because this democracy, and every year let's pick another businessman who, when I say businessman, it's sort of like businessman mentality. The guy might have been a politician all his life, but he's got a businessman mentality. It doesn't matter. These seats that at the top of the government, suddenly like 350 million vote, and they choose one person at the top of the government, and that one person always happened to be a favorite of the rich. That's good. And most of the time, the average Joe has to. They actually say it, that I had to hold my nose and vote for him or her. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm sorry, within 350 million people, you couldn't find a better person? You had these two at the end, and one of these two is so bad that you had to hold your nose? And you say this system is so good, we have to export it? That becomes one of your principles. That our system is so good that we can consider as a principle. They have come up with the idea that democracy is a principle that we like to push around the world. That's not a principle. Democracy is not principle. Shelter, food, education, healthcare, these are principles. Anything else is interest. Democracy may or may not be in the interest of those fucking cocksuckers over there. It may or may not be in their interest. Democracy. End of story. democracy may or may not be in their interest. They determine if they have evolved to a point that they, recognize something like democracy, they will have it, maybe, or they won't. Who the fuck cares? They have stability. The cocksucker on top is, is a real big cocksucker, so they have stability. That's fine, because stability brings housing, food, shelter, education. Housing, education, health. That big cocksucker over there, Gaddafi, had housing, had everything under control. There were no famines in Libya. And those who wanted to fucking get educated would go get educated. They didn't need freedom. They're a bunch of savages. He was keeping some kind of control. It was a principled idea that we should not oppose the guy who has kept peace here. Whatever draconian measures he had to undertake to bring peace in that shithole, I guess he had to undertake, because it's a real shithole. Real shitholes need draconian measures to be governable. The idea is so principle. If the replacement of founding fathers were at the top instead of a lot of these politicians who were joyful in the fall of Gaddafi. They were joyful in the fall of Saddam. Saddam was a cocksucker, but he had brought stability to that fucking area. You work with the motherfucker. You don't sanction him, you don't embargo him, you don't bomb him. You work with the motherfucker because he's got a stable area going, and stability, which brings education, healthcare, and housing. That stability is good because that's a principle. Stability that brings those things, stability is necessary to have an educational system and housing and healthcare. That stability is a principle. We want to have that. That stability. So whoever the fucking cocksucker who's bringing that stability, you keep in place and you work with him. Because he's at least answering to all three of your principles. By creating stability, it has resulted to achieving more of those principles: housing, healthcare, and education. But no, you tried to sell, at least to your own population, that, oh no, from now on democracy is a principle. So it's Christianity is a principle, democracy is a principle, freedom is a principle. None of these are principles. You define freedom in your own way. The cocksucker living under a tent defines freedom in his own way. On the other side of the cocksucker, Bedouins living under the tent with the Bedouin next to him, each one of them, eyeing each other's wives and daughters, because they have nothing else to do under their tent in the middle of a desert. Their sense of freedom, you can be sure, is much different from your sense of freedom. If you're, walking around in Elysee Palace and you have nothing else to do except, gorge yourself on food and do whatever. The point is this: freedom is not a principle. Education is. Democracy is not a principle. Housing is. You have chosen to call your interest democracy. If they have the same form of government as we do, so our rich people can buy their politicians just like they're buying us. Here, for example, I am, a representative. I'm telling the people, hey, we need to go make them democracy so our rich people can buy their politician just like they're buying us. That's the advantage of democracy for rich people. They can buy whoever they like and buy a seat for whoever they like. They can buy a seat for whoever they like. And in case of, Mr. Supreme Court judges, well, let's see if we can buy them after they get their seat. Apparently that's the only difference between politicians and judges. The judges, people buy their seat after the judges determine. In politicians, you have to first buy the seat. Then put whoever you want in it. Anyway, the point is this. Of course, it becomes more difficult to buy judge because you have to have many interests in common, or you have to have a lot, the kind of money that would buy a judge. Not everybody has the kind of money that would buy a judge. Anyway, so buying politicians is much cheaper, much cheaper. Here's the thing, folks. Buying politician in a democracy is basically like, racehorse owners go and buy racehorses. They look at them, they evaluate them. They know their message is going to stay the same. It's just that who I need to find, who's charming enough, who's intelligent enough, who can sell my interest as principles. Basically, if I'm a rich man and have that kind of money to buy a politician, I would be looking around for somebody who's charming enough, who can sell interest as principle, who can say that we are over there kicking ass based on this, and this is a principle, although everybody knows it's not a principle. But the guy has to be very charming to pull a hat out of his bag and sell democracy as a principle. We're going to destroy the stability over there. We're going to create havoc over there because they deserve democracy. Because democracy has become a principle. Folks, if you push principles all across the planet, including in your own land, first of all, as a center of the empire, you're always going to get paid more. That's natural, and nobody is fighting that. Just the whole idea of having your currency being the reserve currency of the world, that's an advantage that a lot can be achieved with that towards your principles, education, housing, and healthcare. When your money is the reserve currency of the planet, you can use those profit could have been used to go after these principles and make it the best: housing, healthcare, and education. But no, capitalism basically has, when the top politicians of a democracy are capitalists and businessmen who were also chosen by businessmen, and businessmen are everywhere. Businessmen don't follow principles. Businessmen follow interest. When you own an empire and you start following interest, then you have to talk from both sides of your mouth. On one side, say that invasion of Europeans to the east, the Russian, the invasion of the Middle Europe by far East Europe is wrong. Invasion of Russia to Ukraine is wrong. On one side of the mouth, you have to say that those Eastern Europeans should not invade the Middle Europeans, and on the other side of your mouth, you have to say that but invasion of Asian land by these Europeans, in case of Israel and Palestine, invasion of Asian land by this group of Europeans, that's okay. That's bad, that's not okay, and that's okay. Going both directions because you're following your interest, both places. That invasion is not in our interest, and this invasion is in our interest. then folks, at this point you're a bully, because you're following your interest and not your principles. Principles means if invasion is okay in case of Israel, then invasion is okay in case of Russia. In case of Ukraine, Palestine. You can't, you can't say they're both good, they're both okay. If you can't say they're both okay, and you say you have principles, then you have to say, okay, based on our principles, no, neither one is okay. Okay, declare a secular state in Israel and include everybody, even the brown skins, and as part of your population, and call it a fucking day. And stop the fucking thing with Ukraine. Ukraine is going to be independent, and no, it's not going to be part of NATO. Russia pulled back. We're going to go back to when Ukraine was a buffer zone. And you don't interfere, we don't interfere, everything is fine. But that would be a principled position. Nobody's talking about that. Neither on the left nor on the right. Because they each have their favorite in this game. This game of interest that they're playing. I'm sorry, but empire, which I don't mind, becomes a burden and, difficult to continue when everybody starts following their interest and not principles. There is no, acceptance of principles. United Nations, everybody in United Nations voted against Israel every time, but veto power was pulled out of a few members' hats, and Israel was saved from all blame every time. That's not principle. If everybody else is agreeing on some shit, it must be a principle. Everybody else at that level, United Nations. If more than 51% of nations agree on something, everybody should agree. Nobody should have a veto power. What is this veto power? Veto power is protecting interests and not standing with principles. And that's why you don't give veto power to everybody. You have gave veto power over every resolution to 5 members, 4 of whom happen to be white countries. France, England, Uncle Sam's managers, Russia, they're all white. And then China. So these people can override principles by putting their interests first. And even these folks sometimes don't agree, like in invasion of Iraq, where suddenly French fries became freedom fries. We're going to go bring freedom to the Iraqis, because freedom has now become our principle. Freedom was never a principle. Because the reason freedom is not a principle, because it's not a finite idea. And it's not a well-defined idea, and it's not a finite idea. But education is a principle because it's a finite idea. When the product you're producing in the society, that means you're doing a good job in education. If your product is shit coming out of your school system, then I'm sorry, you're not following a principle. Principles are achievable. Food, everybody's fed. Healthcare, everybody gets the healthcare they need, the drugs they need, the doctors they need, the hospital rooms they need at the price that doesn't send them to the bank, send them to bankruptcy. If you don't have that, you don't have one of your principles. Principles are only 3 things in an empire or in a country. 3 principles: healthcare, food, shelter, education. And you have shelter and education, you probably can get your own food. The point is this, education, shelter, and healthcare. These are principles. These you should follow. When you, as an empire, as an emperors in Washington D.C., if you follow these principles, first in your own land, then try to help other lands to, have healthcare. Them. I'm sorry, Uncle Sam's managers, I love you, man. I love Uncle Sam. I don't love you, but I love Uncle Sam. But folks, you have been importing doctors and engineers from abroad for decades now, for 100 years now. That's not a principle. They can be. You're importing your healthcare needs, doctors and nurses. Why? Those countries who are losing these doctors and nurses, you're harming their principles. They're trying to provide their people with healthcare, education, and housing, but you're robbing them of their doctors and of their scientists, and that's their educators. That's their scientists. So instead of helping them as the most successful, best, greatest land on earth, instead of helping them, you have not been able to meet your needs in terms of healthcare, in terms of education. So you're importing what little they are producing to meet your needs. That's not a principle. That's an interest. You do that because it's in your interest. Why? Because, producing doctors is very expensive. So it's in our interest to import cheaper doctors. Because if we have to produce the numbers that we need, it becomes very expensive. As a society, it becomes very expensive for us. So we're going to import it. Imported ones are cheaper because they're raising these doctors on, much cheaper education and much cheaper labor and much cheaper this and much cheaper that. That's an interest. You're solving your own problem at the expense of poor shitholes around the world. That's an interest. You're not following principles. Principle? To follow principles, you say, I'm going to train as much doctors and nurses that I need and start from first grade. Bring my people up so well that they're going to meet all my healthcare needs with doctors and nurses and all my education needs for well-paid, well-respected teachers. You don't do that. You take other people's, you invite other people's. You incentivize immigration of these educators and healthcare workers. You're not following principles. Principle would say you educate your own to meet your own need, and once you exceed your own needs, you start sending these educators and doctors around the world. That's what, by the way, that's what Uncle Sam's managers did right after World War II. Right after World War II, during the Marshall Plan, and a few years through the Marshall Plan and after Marshall Plan, there were all these institutions around the world that Uncle Sam's managers opened that were teaching people English all across the planet. What happened? You went from exporting education to start importing educators. I'm sorry, for a decade or two after World War II, you were following your principles. And empire worked just fine. But then you started following your interest. Your politicians, your people, the people in charge. Salute. The people in charge started following interest instead of principles. There were American hospitals left and right in the Middle East, in Asia, right after World War II, until Vietnam War. And basically, this idea of let's educate the planet, let's have a Marshall Plan, let's do this idea of standing on principles went away, and chasing interest came forward, took over. And chasing interest by one of the main ways of convincing the population to start chasing the interest of the very few was fear of communism, and fear of nuclear war, and fear of the others. By this fear, they were able, by creating fear against the masses, inside the masses, they started peddling their own interest. And suddenly, when you put fear in people with regards to communism, then you can sell capitalism to the public as a principle. If they don't fear communism, you can't sell them capitalism as a principle. Capitalism becomes just an idea that we practice. But in order for capitalism to be substituted as a principle, is if you force your people to fear the other side very much. Then you can sell them anything. That 9/11, the effect was psychological. They were able to sell two wars on one psychological effect. And the psychological effect was so bad that yes, they were able to sell two wars. They started selling democracy as a principle, and freedom as a principle. That I remember the senator who went on a Senate floor and trying to sell war with Afghanistan by wearing a burqa, whatever the fuck it is. It's the veil that the Afghani woman wears head to toe. And if there was an intellectual person instead of that woman who knew better and had some integrity, because intellectual people usually have the integrity. If there was an intellectual person there, would have said to herself that, hey, these women have to cover from head to toe because their men are shit. It's that simple. If Afghani men were not around, their women could have walked around naked if they were all women. It's just the Afghani man, it's the Pakistani man, the Irani man, the Iraqi man. It's such shit that the women are safe if they're in a box. Under if the men don't see them, the women are safer because the men are shit. That has nothing to do with freedom. It's sort of like sending your sister out in a bad part of town in a short skirt. What do you think is going to happen? It's sort of like it's a bad neighborhood. There's shitty people. You don't want your sister in a miniskirt there. Or somebody's going to try to buy her. At least that's the least of your worries. So the point is this: you don't define their freedom as your freedom. Your men don't try to rape you if you wear a short skirt in the street. They do. This is who they are. You want to help them, you go educate them. Principles. You follow principles instead of bombing them, you educate them. Maybe they start looking at the world your way. But you don't do that. You don't follow principles. Education is a principle. Housing is a principle. Healthcare is a principle. Nothing else is principle. Not freedom, not form of government, not form of economy. None of these are principles. You take the freedom away from the guy ends up in jail. But if you take the shelter away from the guy is going to be living under the sun, under the rain. You see that's as clearly as I can put what the difference between freedom and principle. Principle is necessary. Freedom, okay, did something bad, you put him in jail, he has shelter, hopefully. Except in Arizona, one of the sheriffs had a tent city. Well, technically, a tent has a roof as well. Folks, Empire is a great idea. Thank you very much. It's working great. It used to work great. It used to work much better. Now it's not working so great. The reason is everybody is following their interests. And the reason for that is that you have a bunch of businessmen in charge. Either these businessmen are directly in charge, like Mr. Mitt Romney, or the businessmen are in charge of the politicians who are in charge. Like all these politicians who are, have got really rich real fast. So basically that means, they have businessman friends and money is important to them, so they make more of it. The point is this. First, it would have been great if you choose a 13-member intellectual group of people at the top of your government, much like China. I think that's a great idea. Have 13-member intellectuals at the top whose duty it is that at any given time, each one of them has to choose their own replacement. And because they're intellectuals, they choose their own replacement who are going to be intellectuals, and intellectuals understand that you only make decisions on principles because you want to keep the empire going, because empire is better than anarchy. But the problem is you have to be smart enough to make decisions only based on principles. Imagine Uncle Sam's managers were running an empire right now, that instead of all these military bases around the world, Uncle Sam managers had universities around the world. All these bases can easily be turned into universities. This is American University here, American University there, American University there. And you're teaching locals with your own personnel from America, teaching biology and microbiology and engineering and, medicine. But the problem is you're not doing that. You're there with soldiers to follow interest, not principles. If you had, instead of all these military bases, you had universities and workshops in these camps in 800 military bases, imagine 800 American universities using the same buildings to teach the locals. That's a principle. That's following the principle. Under those circumstances, who the fuck doesn't want to join that empire? Nobody wouldn't want to join that empire. You see, you gotta run your ship in a way that people want to join. I hear a lot of people, want to go work for Elon Musk. You run it, maybe you run it a little rough and tough, but the sense of achievements that people get of the work they believe in gives you that oomph that people want to join you instead of someone else. Join your empire. That comes from following principles. That's one of the things Mr. Musk did, as my understanding is. He he doesn't have a life of his own. He's just sleeping on the factory floor if he has to keep the system moving forward. And if he has to visit 3, 4, 5 different places in the same day, he does, because he's trying to follow the principles that he wants his employees to follow. If you work on principles, you will get a bigger empire. And they will stand in line to join your fucking empire if you follow principles and you start not start picking friends and enemies based on who pays me more, who's more in my interest. Should I have this friend? This friend is making money this way, and that friend is making money that way. That friend is losing me money. I don't like you anymore. Fuck you. Get lost. That's not principle. That's interest. Businessmen do that all the time. You're not making money for me. You're out of here. Believe me, I know. I worked in fucking car dealerships. Businessmen will release you if you're not making money for them. That's a good businessman. But that's not principle. You can't run an empire business style. You can't pick your friends and enemies based on who's making me more money. That's a gang. That's a gang, and the leader is a bully. Salute to the bullies. You follow principles or you lose the empire. You start following principles if you're the country which exports excess teachers and exports excess doctors and exports excess nurses and exports excess engineers. If you're that country, you can run that fucking empire forever because everybody loves you and everybody's going to stand in line to join your empire. But if you're running an empire based on interest because you put some businessmen in charge and the only thing they really understand is interest, then I'm sorry, the empire is not going to last very long. It's just not. It just doesn't, because soon there will be a fight. Sooner or later there will be a fight because the interests don't match. This whole idea of that confiscating Russian money and yachts and everything that Russia had. Russia is overstepping our interest in Ukraine. It's in our interest for Ukraine to become part of NATO. And Russia doesn't accept, so fuck him. We're going to go to war and we're going to confiscate all of their money. That's not working on principles. You're giving money to a bunch of Europeans in Israel who have invaded Asia and claiming the land their own. You give them money, but you blockade the Russian money and take over Russian money because it's based on principles. We can't have two different principles. Principles, housing, healthcare, and educational principles. Those are interests. That's why you dance to a different tune in each occasion. I love empires, but you have to, if you want to keep the empire, you have to go back to principles. Take care of yourself and then start educating the rest of the planet. That's how you can keep an empire going, not by force. Soldiers are only going after interest, and nobody's happy. The natives are not happy with soldiers, but the natives would be very happy with teachers. I'm sorry, you need intellectuals in charge. You keep coming up with a bunch of businessmen or businessman lackeys, and as long as these people are in charge, you keep following interest and not principles. Nothing against businessmen, love businessmen, but They're not good for running a society, an empire, leading a country or an empire. Businessmen just are good for that business. And businessmen should have no say in politics, and they shouldn't be allowed to donate money in order to pick a politician, because businessmen only follow interests. Businessmen don't understand principles. Businessmen should be kept away from politicians by 10-foot pole. By not politicians, businessmen should be kept away from decision makers with a 10-foot pole, because businessmen follow interests, but decision makers who have to look at the whole picture have to be the kind of people who follow principles. George W. Bush was not a principle follower, neither was Clinton, nor was Obama, maybe a little. Principle of healthcare, principle of education, principle of housing. Obama at least did that, followed through with healthcare. Something that, Mrs. Clinton probably, wasn't able to. She had some interest, other people some had interest, overtook principle. In case that's why Mrs. Clinton wasn't able to pass healthcare, although, she took a lot of time and took a lot of attention, and eventually nothing. Somebody got bought, somebody got sold, interest overrode principles. Although everybody could see that there is a need here. Healthcare for all the members of the fucking tribe. That's a principle. Founding fathers would have voted for it. Yes, all the members of the tribe need healthcare. They need to have the right to see the shaman. That's, what tribe is all about. All the members of the tribe have the right to access the shaman. Folks, the moment you step away from the people who run societies, the moment you step away from principles of housing, healthcare, and education, you will be following interest. And that's what harms the empire and eventually ends the empire.